Bibliosophie.
Hello, welcome. I'm Sophie. I am so shiny because I just put on sunscreen. It's maybe a little alarming. I'm starting a vlog. It is Sunday morning, barely morning. I'm still in my lovely pajamas, as you can see, and I've been reading a bunch of books. I am vlogging partially because that's a thing I used to do a lot, so I'm trying to get back into it. And also because it's a little easier to talk about books in chunks. I have a lot of books kind of in process currently. 2 novels, currently both taking place in Paris, actually. I started a couple of days ago septième fonction du langage by Laurent Binet. In English, it is, I suspect, the 7th function of language. This is a funny, weird book, very niche. It is sort of a mystery novel based around the actual death of Roland Barthes. And so Binet takes the actual events of Barthes' death in 1980. He was knocked over by a truck in the street in Paris and subsequently died of that. But he takes that as the seed for a mystery novel. So he has a French cop and a young PhD student kind of who team up and who investigate the death. To my knowledge, actually, historically speaking, there's nothing really to investigate. It was an accident, but it is a novel that really mixes fact and fiction with all of these historical figures of kind of post-structuralist philosophy, semiology, the French intellectual crowd of the late 70s and early 80s, as well as Françoise Mitterrand, the president who would become president. So it's a very niche content. I am, I don't know, something like 80 pages into it or so, and so far quite enjoying it. I don't know how it would read to somebody who doesn't know about Foucault and Barthes and Kristeva and, you know, all of these figures. I expect it is probably kind of daunting, or maybe not. Maybe you can just kind of gloss over it and it's just a bunch of weird people doing weird things. I'm not sure. The other book that I've recently started reading as an audiobook is Lauren Elkin's Scaffolding. This is a novel that just came out recently and that I've been interested in reading because I have liked her nonfiction books. I've read 2 of them, I think, this year. I sort of discovered her this year. It also takes place in Paris. It is a couple of different narratives. One is following a contemporary woman named Anna. She's Franco-American and living in an apartment in Belleville. And her husband works in London and she's alone. She's dealt recently with a miscarriage. It is also very intellectual, actually, because Lacan is the sort of figure who looms large over scaffolding. She is a psychoanalyst, is that how you say that? Yes. But she's currently on leave and she's very much festering in her apartment and in a place of suspension and stasis, I would say. We are also going to follow the previous inhabitants of that apartment. I've just started a section, actually, of that family a few decades earlier. And so it's kind of dual narrative, dual timeline. Right now I'm in this Goldilocks moment where I feel truly normal and I'm using it. It worked out really well. I had to cancel almost all of my October, November gigs, but I am doing a recording gig today. So I'm going into Manhattan for the first time in over a month, which is wild. I've been very much cocooning at home or near home for a long time. And I'm excited. It's a gorgeous day. And yeah, so I'm gonna try to take it easy. That's my new life mantra. Sophie doesn't overdo it. Delphis is my new name. But no, I'm excited. Wearing clothes, looking good, I have to put away so many things. Hello, I am wearing eye makeup for the first time in quite a while. I am overcompensating. I'm overcompensating for two reasons. One, physically, I'm in great shape, but I absolutely do not want to accomplish anything. I feel so lazy. I've gotten out of the habit of being productive, and that's okay up to a certain point, but I do want to actually do some basic things when I can. And second of all, I am losing my hair in a massive way. I will probably shave my head today or tomorrow. So I wanted to feel pretty. Voila. One of the books I have been reading is The Age of Loneliness by Laurent Marris. This is a collection of essays that came out earlier this year, I think. Was it? I can't remember if it was end of 2023 or if it was, I think it's 2024, just recently in 2024, yes. And I've been actually really excited to read it. I knew she was working on this collection, and I have liked her writing previously. And also, The Age of Loneliness essays? I mean, come on, perfect. I tend to be such a lonely bastard. So definitely a topic that interests me. These essays specifically, or at least the first few, and I think it's going to be a trend overall, are dealing very much with the intersection between human loneliness and ecology and climate change, ecological collapse, specifically a lot with birds and birding, both as a personal connection because it's part of her kind of family history and personal history, but also as a sign of kind of planetary loneliness. I had not actually kind of thought about the loneliness of ecological change and its extinction, but of course there is this loneliness that comes out of what we're doing to our planet, and that is a loneliness of species missing, of individual animals not finding mates, of course. The part of that is, of course, from our vantage point, we kind of impose maybe a loneliness on certain animals who are now so few and far between within their species. So we don't know what they're feeling, but we certainly feel a sort of loneliness for them. But it also forces us as human beings to, when witnessing non-human animals disappear, kind of wonder about our own extinction, the extinction of ways of life, of cultures, because it's all so very much interconnected. I started to wonder if, in the Eremocene, loneliness could be a helpful feeling because it makes it harder to overlook what's missing. There's a strength, a stubbornness to being lonely, to insisting on the importance of what's no longer there. Loneliness is worth listening to because it longs for reconnection, a hurt that illuminates its antidote, a symptom that desires its cure. This really hit me because I have been feeling so much loneliness in the past few years. I think I'm predisposed to it. And of course, I think a lot of us feel a tremendous amount of loneliness. We have so many good reasons for it, right? Loneliness is why I became a performer, a musician, because I feed myself with the attention from others. And by giving them my attention, I need that kind of communication. I love this stubbornness of loneliness, calling out perhaps the virtue of feeling lonely. I, especially 3 years ago, was really adamant about not allowing people to tell me that it was okay or that it would get better or things like this, because I felt like people were trying to strip me of my loneliness, trying to explain it away. And there are many explanations, but I wanted to hold on to it. I still want to hold on to my loneliness when I feel it. I do feel that stubbornness. You are allowed it, and it is there for a reason. So I felt very seen by this. On a completely opposite track, feeling overwhelmed by love. Because I have been feeling wonderfully overwhelmed by love in the past month, and actually not too terribly lonely in my current state, which is wonderful. My loneliness has gotten better in the past, I would say 6 months to a year anyway, but I want to talk to you about the Book of Disquiet for a hot second, which is another thing I've been reading for the past couple of weeks on and off. There is specifically one citation which really made me laugh and felt so completely perfect to my current state of affairs. I read it, I think 2 weeks ago, just after I announced online for the first time that I had cancer, and I got this drove of support. I had already been having a lot of support from my close loved ones anyway. And then I think the following morning, I read a section that involved the sentence in French, "Quelle fatigue que d'être aimé, d'être véritablement aimé." What fatigue, what tiredness to be loved, to be truly, veritably loved. And that made me crack up, because also, yes, this, when you finally feel these pockets of truly being appreciated and loved, there is also this kind of soul searching that goes along with it. It's a very powerful, weird emotion. I am really, really enjoying this. One of these days I would like to read it again, because there are so many things I could take down, so many quotations that I could note, and I've been mostly passing through relatively quickly without trying to analyze and take out everything, every gem that I came across. But I would love to read it again. I think I probably will in a year. Yeah, and this has been a very, very good reading experience for me. And wow, I have been talking for a very long time already. Buzz buzz.
I'm in such a good mood.
I am pretty close to done with Scaffolding, and yeah, it's been really good. I was listening to it while taking a walk this morning. It's a pretty short book. I mentioned that it has multiple narratives over a couple of different time periods. So far, there's only one narrative in modern day Paris, but there's a dual first person narrator in 1972. We have a couple who used to live in the apartment of the woman who's living in it now in present day Paris. There's a through line in all of the narratives over the decades, which is fidelity and infidelity, desires in and out of marriage. How well can you know your partner? Yearning, not just, sexual outside of marriage, but for identity and figuring yourself out, and career, gender dynamics, pregnancy and children, wanting children, not wanting children, the complications of that. So these are very, very personal stories that also form a good backdrop for kind of larger themes of latter 20th century life, really, and 21st century life. Some of those are really, really specific to the neighborhood. There's a lot about the neighborhood, gentrification. So this takes place in, I mentioned, I think already, Belleville, which is a part of Paris that's mostly contained in the 20th arrondissement, although not entirely. And you might actually probably, if you know anything about Paris, you probably have some knowledge of this neighborhood. It's pretty close to Montmartre, and actually quite close. And it's been an important kind of artistic center for a long time, especially at the turn of the 20th century. This is the neighborhood of Edith Piaf, for instance. So there's been a long history of art and kind of, you know, scuzziness. It's a neighborhood that's had kind of gone through its ups and downs and kind of been abandoned after the Second World War. So it's always had an important kind of underground flavor to it, and maybe a little some squats and kind of scuzziness. It was also traditionally a big Jewish neighborhood, an Ashkenazi neighborhood, I think specifically, and that comes into play because Jewishness and Judaism are important in both the modern narrative and in the narrative of the 1970s. It's an important element in the couples and in at least some of the members of the couples and kind of their surroundings, their identity. So the book also deals with the difficulty of being a French Jew and how at odds those identities tend to be, the trauma of being a French Jew, family trauma, which goes into whether to have children or not, whether to be with a partner or not. There's also a lot to do with French feminism and gender roles, especially in 1972. That year is important. It's just a few years after 1968, which was the student protests and a really big watershed moment of radicalism. In the 70s, you get a lot of feminist fights for various laws, abortion rights especially. There are these major kind of specific historic moments that are really seeded into the DNA of the book, which is unsurprising. These are topics that Elkin has written about in nonfiction: cities, art. Art also in modern day Paris. In the modern day narrative is important, and specifically street art, and that is also very specific to Belleville, which is a focal center of street art. The narrator is really interested in tags that she sees on the street, feminist tags. So I'm getting a lot of shades of the two previous Elkin books which I read, Flaneuse, which was about cities and a lot about Paris, and Art Monsters, which was about feminist art and kind of feminist representation. So it's interesting to see how she weaves those obvious interests of hers into a narrative, and I think really very well. I mentioned in my previous video that I'd been reading essays by Lydia Davis. These are a lot about translation. I want to recommend, I like them. I've read several of these. I want to specifically recommend the very first essay, in this, which is called 21 Pleasures of Translating and a Silver Lining. And yeah, it's just that. It's short, and it's 21 Pleasures of Translating that I very much agree with. The freedom of translation, the ritual of translation, the kind of structure afforded by translation. If you're at all interested in translation and what it is, what it can be, I think it's a really beautiful distillation of what I find so pleasurable about doing my own translations and reading other people's translations, reading about translation. Okay, that's the update. It is so damn warm in this spot right now. As you can see, I have shaved off the hair. It was really lovely to do that, actually. I had a really wonderful time last night. My friend shaved my head, and yeah, it felt very triumphant. So that's nice. it's still falling out anyway, so it's not going to look like this for probably that much longer. I'll have patches, maybe I'll look like a cow. But it's kind of it's a weight off me, actually, to have my just clack.
Scaffolding by Laurent Elkin.
Today's fit. Today's Seiko fit is giving granny, and it's giving 20-year-old raver boy.
Still reading Authority.
I have no idea.
Sold in 1474.
I figured it was time for a Bookish update because there is a fair amount to update upon. I was in the hospital for not quite a week for chemo. I do my chemo inpatient as a continuous infusion, which is both more intense and less intense in various ways. And I've been back home for a couple of days now, just kind of cooing and recovering. And I did quite a lot of reading. So I finished ye old Fernando Pessoa. I would definitely love to read this again. I think anybody who reads it once could deserve to read it again. There are so many aphorisms, thoughts, things to hold on to and not to hold on to, more on that in a second, that I think I would love to do a second reading of it. And then, of course, admittedly, there are whole sections of this that I was a little bit kind of blurry brained for. I did a lot of reading of this ultimately in my 2 hospital stays, actually. And it was a good accompaniment. So overall, as I said previously, I had been really enjoying it and did enjoy it. I definitely hit a wall. I mentioned in the previous video that I posted that I also find some of the sections and personae and iterations of Pessoa absolutely insufferable, and that continued to be the case, and it kind of became more and more the case. So there are some things that I just absolutely fell in love with. It felt like it totally resonated with what I already thought, or kind of crystallized a manner of thinking that I was towards. And then there were some things that were just utterly insufferable. They feel very kind of post-Nietzsche, post-19th century. This feels like the work of a kind of tortured early 20th century virgin, which it basically is. And it's really hard to read about superior man a lot. You know, there are just some things that are utterly insufferable after a while. So if you can take those with a grain of salt, which I tried to do, I mean, there are also some wonderful things. And there are also some things where I'm kind of semi-annoyed and also don't entirely disagree with him either. This is the Richard Zenith translation. We apply the name romantics both to the great men who failed and to the little men who showed themselves for what they were. But the only similarity between the two is in their overt sentimentality, which in the former denotes an inability to make active use of the intelligence, while in the latter it denotes the lack of intelligence itself. A Chateaubriand and an Hugo. But Chateaubriand is a great soul that was diminished, Hugo a little soul that was inflated by the winds of the day. I don't share as much vitriol for Victor Hugo as he does apparently, but I'm on his side in preferring Chateaubriand over Hugo. Freedom is the possibility of isolation. You are free if you can withdraw from people, not having to seek them out for the sake of money, company, love, glory, or curiosity. Yes, on the one hand, yes, but also I abhor this sort of solitary artiste thought process. So this is partially what I find so insufferable. There's some aspects that are true. You should be able to live in solitude, and then also this sort of isolationist, superior man bullshit does not do it for me. The highest honor of a superior man is to not know the name of his country's chief of state, or whether he lives under a monarchy or a republic. Okay, cool. He should be careful to position his soul in such a way that passing things and events can't disturb him. Otherwise, he'll have to take an interest in others in order to look out for himself. Give me a break. But then things that don't exasperate me at all, things that I just sort of feel deeply. I know that today will oppress me as when I can't grasp a thing. I know that everything I do today will be marked not by weariness from the sleep I didn't have, but by the insomnia I did have. I know that my existence will feel even more like sleepwalking than usual, not just because I haven't slept, but because I couldn't sleep. I feel that deeply. One more nice citation for the sake of journalistic integrity. No one has yet defined tedium in a language comprehensible to those who have not experienced it. What some people call tedium is merely boredom. Others use the term to mean a nagging discomfort. Still others consider tedium to be weariness. But while tedium includes weariness, discomfort, and boredom, it doesn't resemble them any more than water resembles the hydrogen and oxygen of which it is composed. So the final verdict is that I'm glad I finally read this. I have liked Pessoa's poetry for a while. And in fact, when I got really exasperated with this book a couple of times, I reminded myself that I liked him by dipping back into some of his poetry. I highly recommend it in its imperfections and its weirdnesses. I'm also going to send you over to Emily's channel, who recently posted a short kind of overview of Pessoa's work, which is a really nice kind of primer on his life and his various works. So I'll link that in the description. It's November now. I did finish The Age of Loneliness while I was in hospital. My interest waned sometimes even within essays, but overall I'm really glad I read that collection. My interest waning is really more to do with me and kind of the threshold that I reach with nature writing. It's just not what I gravitate towards typically anyway, and I think Marris really does a lovely job of threading together personal memoir, ecology, nature writing, larger investigation in a way that is very poetic. I finished La septième fonction du langage, the seventh function of language, which turned out to be a weird time, which I kind of figured it would be. It was not just actually in Paris. We went to Bologna, we went to Ithaca, far-flung places. It ended up being quite a political thriller. I've mentioned this before. I don't know what one gets out of it if one does not know about French politics in the 80s and about semioticians and linguists. It's so niche. So for me, it was highly amusing, weird. I think there were too many threads, but I think that's also purposeful. But I don't know how it holds the interest of somebody who is not already acquainted with the cast of characters. Maybe it does anyway. It's really about the material function, the material power of language. And Binet's tone is at once, I think, kind of a little distant and judgmental and mocking of that particular time period of French intellectualism, but also very knowledgeable of it, and I think also has a soft spot for it. I'm not entirely sure. It varied. It's kind of both. It felt very in, and then also kind of slightly remote and looking from beyond at a specific time and place, a perhaps quite naive time and place of what language, what was the political power of language. So it's a weird kind of surrealist, slightly, actually more than slightly macho book. It surrounds itself with a lot of men, but a weird one. The last book of the month that I read was Vivienne by Emmalea Russo, just under the wire. I started it on the 30th, finished it on the 31st. It's a super fast read, very, very compelling. I was very much hooked. This is an art world novel. Vivienne is a controversial artist who has completely disappeared from public life after the death of another artist. Was she complicit in it? Was she not? This is you know, familiar territory. There are those art world controversies. Who was complicit in what? Who was responsible for what? Cancel culture, guilt, etc. So she lives in the middle of nowhere with her daughter and granddaughter. Interest in her arises again because her work is chosen for a female surrealist group show, and then that kind of reignites the internet. Part of the reason why this is such a fast read is that also it's kind of a multimedia experience in a lot of ways. There are video descriptions, there are tweets, there are comments, so you're sifting through a lot of voices of what to forgive, what not to forgive, who's to blame, etc. It gets very, very weird at the end in a way that I have not completely wrapped my head around, partially because I finished it last night also. But overall, I had a great time reading it. So I'm still trying to sift through the very last section. But yeah, it has a lot to do with the life of art and the afterlife of art. And the kind of the role of the artist. What do we expect of artists? What do we kind of take from them? Voila. All right, I'm gonna sign out. Catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.